So I've been hearing a lot of horror stories this week in terms of LFG and Pantheon and just Pantheon in general and the difficulty of it. And one thing I really wanted to look at and focus on, obviously there's, knowing the mechanics of the encounters, and that's its own separate thing and definitely something people need to know. But one thing I wanted to focus on was the damage and how to do damage and how to get more damage and just like the really, really basic stuff. Again, this is a video that for a lot of people is probably going to be extremely basic and extremely obvious, but if you are newer to raiding, you're newer to endgame PvE, I think this is stuff that is really, 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 really important and also really, really easy and just like more basic setup stuff to pull off that's going to give you significantly more damage. Now, the first thing we want to look at whenever we're doing any sort of PvE endgame stuff is if there's any surges. And if you don't already know, basically these surges are going to give 25% bonus damage to any outgoing damage that you do. This can be supers, abilities, heavy, special, doesn't matter. It's going to be any of that, anything that does that damage type, you're going to be doing 25% more damage. So for this week on Pantheon, that's Void and Strand. For future weeks, I'm assuming it'll probably change, but you really, really, really want to focus on these surges and making sure that you're pairing the damage that you're doing with one of them. Now, the one caveat to this is I wouldn't look too deeply into the supers part of the surge damage, especially on something like Titan for Void. Like, you're not really doing damage with those with Void Titan supers. So like if you're a Titan, you're still probably gonna, and you want to get more damage, you're still gonna probably want to run something like Arc with Thunder Crash or Solar with Pyro Gales. Like those are gonna do much better quick damage than anything Void is going to. Obviously Strand Titan is also good, but even that super is not really meant for DPS. It's definitely a decent amount of damage, especially over a longer period of time. But with this week's bosses, honestly, you're not running that either. So if you want damage, and you're looking at the supers side of things, I wouldn't focus on that too much. However, heavy. Heavy is going to be your main DPS for pretty much everything you do, and focusing on those Void and Strand, that 25% damage just off the cuff is a really, really big amount of damage. So a lot of people, we've been talking about Edge Transit this week. Obviously, Edge Transit's a really, really, really great option just in general, and being able to get another 25% bonus damage on top of just its base damage is putting it over the top. Cataphract is in that same boat because it's obviously Strand and has kind of that same envious bait and switch role that is very, very strong. So Cataphract is a perfect fill-in for Edge Transit, but obviously it's Trials versus the Brave weapons that people are focusing on getting a lot easier than something like Trials, so Edge Transit's just the bigger focus. But anything Void or Strand on that heavy is going to be very helpful. Again, we don't know if this is going to be a permanent thing for every week, so first thing you want to do, if you're running Pantheon, check the surges, focus on that. Second thing you're going to want to do, I don't know if this is, again, don't know if this is going to be a permanent modifier or if there's going to be separate different modifiers, but class warfare, this is 20% bonus damage and this stacks with everything. So you really, really, really want to focus on using your class ability at the start of damage phases, during damage phases, keeping that 20% modifier, that 20% extra bonus up throughout the damage phases is huge. If there's a different modifier that does something different than this in future weeks, again, we want to take advantage of that. Hey guys, Editor Duke here, and I just thought this was a really good time to chime in to make sure we're not placing barricades in front of people during the damage phase, or really just moving around during the damage phase. Again, we're going to be talking about a lot of burst damage, rockets, GLs, stuff like that. Don't move around. Don't put a barricade in front of everybody. Don't like dodge halfway across the map in front of everybody. That's it. Thank you. Now, something that some people will consider extremely basic and extremely obvious, and some people have absolutely no idea what they do or how they work, is surges on your boots. Now, these are really, really, really important towards doing more damage. These can stack up to 3. You can have up to 3 surges, right? So right now I have 3 Void Weapon surges. If I'm running 1, I'm going to get 10% bonus damage. If I'm running 2, I'm going to get 17%. If I'm running 3, I can get up to 22% bonus damage just from running these 3 surges. Now, obviously, you do need to have Armor Charge to make these work. Armor Charge is extremely easy. All you need to do is pick up any orb, and again, if you're doing a 6-person raid activity like Pantheon, should be plenty of orbs. If people are running tethers, if people are running wells, which are very useful supers in terms of doing more damage as well, you're going to have orbs around, going to have other mods that we'll talk about in a second. Easy to have the surges for sure, but you really, really, really want to have these up. Now, what you can do, again, another thing people have talked about is survival, right? And so what I've been doing is I actually have different loadouts for like every single Pantheon this week. You don't have to quite go this hard, but what I've been doing is I actually have a separate loadout that has a recuperation in here. This, again, allows us to use those orbs earlier on when we're doing ad clearing to keep us alive. It's going to just give me an insta chunk of health. I also run a scavenger during this part so that after the first damage phase, if we can get some ammo, if I need to go pick up more ammo, this is going to give me ammo quicker. If you want to have like a middle ground, you don't want to have two separate loadouts and remember to swap in between a bunch, which is probably a bit of a higher level thing than a lot of people are going to want to do. I would just recommend running a single recuperation and then 2 surges. You can probably just skip the scavenger because a lot of these bosses we're going to be wanting to 2-phase anyway. So that first phase, you're going to have full ammo because you just rallied. It's your first damage phase. And then again, we'll talk about one other set of mods here in a second that should give you enough ammo to get through a second phase. And one last thing while we're talking about surges, and I get this question all the time. Do these surges, these void weapon surge, or whatever damage type surge you're running, do these stack with the activity surge itself, right? The answer is yes, 100% they do. These are 2 different types of surges. The fact that they're both called surge is probably very confusing for people, and I can definitely understand that, but it is different. They are not the same, and they do stack. So you can get 25%. If I'm running Void, for example, I can get 25% damage right here, and if I'm running my triple Void weapon surges here, this is going to give me another 22% damage. These will stack with each other. They have no effect on each other. Like, they don't counteract each other in any way. They're just both separate things that you can get and take advantage of both. Now, this isn't technically doing more damage with these next 2 mods we're going to talk about, but in reality, it does end up giving you and your team more damage in total because you have ammo. So that's going to be Heavy Ammo Finder and Heavy Ammo Scout combo. Getting kills allows you to have a chance to get heavy ammo. If you get the heavy ammo box from the finder, that's going to then proc Heavy Ammo Scout, which will allow every single person on your team to also get that heavy box. If everyone is running this combination of 2 mods, you're going to have enough heavy, even without things like Aeon, Cenotaph. There's other options to get like guaranteed heavy, but just these 2 mods alone getting kills, and there's a decent amount of ad clearing kind of in between phases and pretty much all these bosses, you're going to have enough heavy just with these. But again, it's very important that multiple people are running. If only like one person is running this combination and everybody else isn't, you're going to get starved on heavy quite often. But if multiple people are doing this, this is a really important combination of mods. Again, super easy. All you got to do is put in 2 mods before you start the encounter, kill some things, and you're going to get some heavy drops. This is probably one of the most obvious ones I'm going to be talking about the whole time, but again, I've ran literally thousands of raids with thousands of people doing helps on my stream, and again, a lot of people don't know what surges are. Explain that to them, totally fine. If you don't know it's a thing, you don't know it's a thing. This one, probably most people know it's a thing, but sometimes they just forget. Boss spec, super easy. You literally just put it on the weapon and shoot the weapon as you normally would. That's an extra 7.7% damage. Like, you gotta use it. You gotta do that. Like, this is so free. Does it like the other things you could be like, oh, I have other mods I want to use. There's nothing else to put. I just put on boss spec. It's another 7.7% damage. Please do it. It's super easy. Now, this one kind of gets me a little bit, is the amount of people that say, oh, Well of Radiance is boring, blah, blah, blah. Well of Radiance is insane. Well of Radiance is super great. I think it's fun. I like to be strong. I think it is fun to be strong, right? Like, again, I think Well of Radiance is maybe too strong, but like, I don't get when people are like, oh, I don't want to be well, oh god, forced to well. Like, it's so good. Why would you not want to be good? Why would you not want to be strong? Why would you not want to make your team strong? Especially in a 6-person raid setting, especially in a very difficult 6-person raid setting. Like, if you're a warlock, I'm not saying, like, if you have 6 warlocks, don't run 6 wells. You don't need that many wells. But like, 2 to 3 wells in pretty much all of these bosses, other than Atrax, which we'll talk about in a second, very, very useful. You want to have that 25% damage buff on, every plate, whether it be Caretaker, whether it be, as many of the pools as you can in Golgoroth, the plates for planets. Like, well works really, really well in all of those cases. Technically, planets, you can, like, put the well in the middle and you touch the plate and go back and forth. But even something like that, I wouldn't recommend. Like, if you just have a well for every plate, then you don't have to worry about people running back and forth. You don't have to worry about people like knowing how to do that, potentially killing each other if you are using GLs or rockets, which I would highly recommend. So just multiple wells, very good. Now, there's two other things I do want to talk about. The first one, again, pretty easy, but you got to remember to do it, is having a separate chest piece with triple reserves for your heavy. Again, Void or Strand or whatever you're using, doesn't matter. If you put this on and you rally with this chest piece, that's going to give you more ammo, which again goes back to more damage. Make sure you have enough ammo for doing damage phases. Usually, I mean, it depends on the weapon, but something like a GL, you're probably going to get 4 to 6 more shots just starting off with this. Even something like a rocket, you're probably going to get 2 to 3, maybe even 4 more shots running triple reserves and rallying with that. I would definitely, again, survival's a big thing here too. Would not recommend running this permanently. That's why it's on a separate chest piece. You rally with this, and then you switch back to your other chest piece with some of the resistance mods. Again, these are extremely crucial for survival, running the correct resistance mods for different bosses. Something like planets, you definitely want to have solar resistance stacked. Again, I have different loadouts for each one of these. Something like Atrax, you definitely want to have stuff like arc resist on, all the snipers, the Atraxes are shooting arc. So having an idea on which resistances to run and be running resistances, super important. Obviously, again, for most people, a super obvious one, but 100 resilience, super basic, gonna keep you alive more. Those are kind of the two main things for survival. Again, this is more of a damage video, but resilience and resistances, those two things alone should keep you alive a lot more often than if you're not running them. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is actually like kind of more boss specific, and this is for planets and caretaker, and just how important burst damage is. Again, we talked about edge transit, GLs being really good, rockets can also work, and honestly, even though it's not Void or Strand, honestly, Apex I feel like is still going to be a good option in a lot of these cases, and you can still run with stuff like rockets. Like, honestly, you don't have to have like the perfect damage, especially in these two bosses. What's actually much more important than maximizing your and this is like infinitely, like I can't describe how much more important this is than like min-maxing your damage. It's when you're doing the damage for these two bosses in particular, because you'll see, and I'll put it on the screen now, there is health gates on both of these bosses, right? And for each section or each kind of like phase that you're doing for damage. For planets, there's like for each plate there's a health gate, but for caretaker there is the the health gate for the entire floor. And for caretaker, and it's slightly different. For caretaker, as soon as you go past that health gate, you've got a couple more seconds to do damage, and you actually get a damage bonus during this time. You are literally doing more damage just for passing this health gate on that floor. But again, you only have a couple seconds. So what's really important is A, to make sure you have your heavy reloaded as you're passing through this health gate, have as many shots of that as possible. B, have it be bursty damage, so you don't like, that's why I don't particularly prefer something like a linear fusion rifle for a boss like this, because that's not as bursty. And C, if you do have damage supers, which I would recommend, a couple wells is good, but outside of that, damage supers is what you're going to want. You're going to want to save those for the end. You're going to want to save those probably for the third plate in something like Caretaker, and go ahead and burst all that damage right as you're passing through that health gate, or right after you pass through that health gate. Again, you don't have a ton of time. You don't want to like wait like 10 seconds, then you're going to be immune. You're not going to do any damage. But like, kind of have a team countdown and just put all that damage in. If you do this correctly, you're going to get that health to about half on Caretaker, and you're going to be able to two-floor him. And again, for Caretaker, A, I mean, two-flooring it makes it just easier because you don't have to do a third floor and be alive. But B, if you do want the plat score, two-flooring it's not like 1,000% required, but it is really, really, really tight to do that third floor, and your runner's got to be super, super on it if we're going to be able to three-floor it and actually still get the plat score. So two-flooring is just easier in terms of, like, again, getting the plat score, but also less time in the encounter means less time to survive, less mechanics to have to do. Like, you want to be able to do that if you can. And again, the same thing applies on planets. You don't get a damage boost going through these health gates, and the health gates are per plate, but the same idea of as soon as you hit that health gate, you still have a couple seconds to do damage, and most of the time you're not burning actually pretty much never, are you burning the plate's timer? You're just burning through on how much damage you're allowed to do on said plate. So actually doing damage slower, but doing more damage when you need to after the health gate is going to allow you to do more total damage. And again, comes back to that whole idea of burst damage being really, really useful and really, really important. I know a lot of people have used machine guns here in the past, and they're not bad. And again, this boss isn't one that has like a ton of health in terms of being able to kill it on planets, but in terms of being able to two-phase, you need to have that extra damage and push past those health gates to be able to do that. And again, if you don't two-phase here, you're probably not going to get the plat score. Again, if you don't care about the plat score, don't worry about that so much. But again, even if you don't care about the plat score, two phases, less time to survive. This is an encounter where there's a lot more fire. The ads are more threatening than they used to be. So three phasing, the attrition of being alive and doing all the mechanics a third time, even without the plat score, still more ways and reasons to potentially wipe and fail on there. One thing we haven't talked about is debuffs, and debuffs are going to be another way to allow you to do more damage. You can either increase your damage directly or force the thing that you're doing damage to take more damage. That's kind of what debuffs are doing, right? And you have things like Tether. If you're running any Void Hunters, Tether is going to give you a 30% damage debuff. You have something like Tractor as well, same 30% debuff. None of these debuffs can stack, by the way, for those that are not aware. But even something, again, if people are running if people are running Pyrogale Titan, stuff like this, or any of the Hunter supers, Blade Barrage or Golden Gun, which are, again, also both really, really, really great in terms of instant burst damage. Honestly, solar classes in general, I feel like, are very good for this. Again, I know it's not Solar Surge this week, but just the supers and the classes and restoration and stuff that Solar brings, I think is really, really high quality. But Revitalizing Blast is going to be a very important perk to potentially kind of build into as well, especially when running these other classes that already bring really good ways to do damage, whether again through damage buff or just the damage itself. Using those abilities is going to be debuffing your boss. So even if obviously your super itself, other than Well, is going to be able to debuff the target. And technically Well can debuff if you drop the flag on, the point of the Well on a boss, but you're not doing that for, I don't think, any of these bosses. Just a tidbit, but any of your melees, your grenades, although Healing Grenade is really good, but melees still allowing for that debuff. So keeping an eye on this, trying to keep that debuff up as much as you can, allowing you to get 15% debuff. Pretty much permanent uptime potentially if multiple people are running different solar subclasses. Really, really useful. Again, if you do have a Tether, if you do have a Tractor Cannon, then you're getting that 30%, and that's going to be even higher uptime. And again, these don't stack, but kind of in between. If it's just a single Tether, you might want to potentially run this after the Tether runs out. So keep that in mind. Another 15%, another way to get 15% more damage. You've also got Heart of the Flame, which again is another reason where some of these big damage solar supers can be extremely helpful. Again, especially because every single boss, other than maybe Atrax, you're going to be next to everybody on your team when you're popping, or most of your team, I guess, because pools, you're not doing that either. But most of your team is going to be near you, so you're getting even more damage. Plus, you're giving everybody Radiant by popping your Solar Super here too, so if you aren't in a Well, that's still 20% more damage. These two mods, very, very useful if you're running any sort of Solar classes, which again, I'd recommend in a lot of cases. This video's got a little bit longer and rambly than I have meant it to, but there's one last important thing that I do want to talk about, and that's with God rolls. Now, we've talked about a lot of different ways to increase your damage, right? Whether it be buffs, debuffs, mods, modifiers, surges, boot surges. Again, all that stuff increases your damage. Most of this stuff stacks with each other, other than the few caveats that I said did not stack with each other. But if you're running a Well, you have boot surges, you're running the proper surge of the activity, Voider Strand this week, you have a debuff, like all that stuff is stacking with each other. You're doing a ton of damage just through those, right? Now, our weapons itself have different roles, right? And a lot of people, for Edge Transit, for example, there's a lot of different examples, but Envious Bait and Switch, potentially even with Spike Grenades, something that people have talked about a lot. Now, I feel like God rolls, quote unquote, is the least important thing out of everything we've talked about today. Like, obviously you need something that is going to do relevant damage. Like, if you're trying to run like a sword on these bosses, other than like Atrax, like you're going to be in shambles, right? But if you're running an Edge Transit, like if you had like Frenzy instead of Bait and Switch, if you had Vorpal, if you like any damage buff at all, like Bait and Switch is 30%, Frenzy's 15, Vorpal's 10, but like any damage buff at all, that's still more damage. And if you're potentially messing up on how to proc Bait and Switch anyway, you're not even really losing out on damage there anyway. So the key is making sure and paying attention to all these things that you can control, right? You can't necessarily control getting a God roll, especially for non-craftable weapons. But you can control doing the little bit of prep work to make sure you have the right mods on, have the right artifact mods equipped. Pay attention to the surges. Pay attention to what super you're running and when you're using that super. Again, super big one, your class warfare for this week in particular. Pay attention to keeping that buff up. All of those things do not require any grind, they do not require any RNG, they just require paying attention to it, or again, in some cases, it's not even paying attention or like in encounter skill, and most of it's not. Most of it's prep. Most of it's just making sure you're set up ahead of time, and that's all giving you, again, boss spec was another one. All that's is giving you more and more and more damage for properly setting up a little bit ahead of time. And again, survival, same thing, 100 resilience, and having the resistance mods. Neither of those things require any grind, any setup, any like, well, it does require a setup, but it doesn't require any grind, doesn't require any like in-encounter movements, like, or quote unquote skill to do. They just give you, it is more ways to do better. Doing damage and surviving, those are the two main things outside of mechanics, and obviously killing things, but that is helped by doing more damage and surviving. So hopefully this video was helpful. Again, I know it was kind of a little bit all over the place, but there was a lot of dense information that is super important for those that may be newer to raiding or just maybe don't know this information. So I hope this video was helpful, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.